Welcome to the Ghostmaker Games!
Yeah, welcome!
We're so glad you're here!
Question 1. Which element is most abundant in universe? The answer is hydrogen. Question 2. Which element is used in balloons to make them float? The answer is helium. Question 3. Which element is often used in batteries? The answer is lithium. Question 4. Which element is used in making windows for X-ray tubes? The answer is beryllium. Question 5. Which element absorbs neutrons efficiently? The answer is boron. Question 6. Which element is the backbone of organic molecules? The answer is carbon. Question 7. Which element is essential for building proteins in living organisms? The answer is nitrogen. Question 8. Which element is essential for respiration? The answer is oxygen. Question 9. Which element is the source of fluoride used in toothpaste? The answer is fluorine. Question 10. Which gas is used in advertising signs to produce a bright red-orange glow? The answer is neon. Question 11. Which element combines with chlorine to form table salt? The answer is sodium. Question 12. Which element is used in fireworks to produce bright white light? The answer is magnesium. Question 13. Which element is used in food packaging? The answer is aluminium. Question 14. Which element is essential in semiconductor industry? The answer is silicon. Question 15. Which element glows faintly in the dark when exposed to oxygen? The answer is phosphorus. Question 16. Which element was historically known as brimstone, often found near volcanoes and hot springs? The answer is sulfur. Question 17. Which element is used to disinfect drinking water and swimming pools? The answer is chlorine. Question 18. Which gas is used inside light bulbs to protect the tungsten filament? The answer is argon. Question 19. Which element is an important nutrient found in fertilizers to help plants grow? The answer is potassium. Question 20. Which element is essential for strong bones and teeth? The answer is calcium. Question 21. Which metal alloyed with aluminium were used in Russian military aircraft, MiG-21 and MiG-29? The answer is scandium. Question 22. Which metal is used in orthopedic and dental implants? The answer is titanium. Question 23. Which element is used in redox flow batteries? The answer is vanadium. Question 24. Which metal is used for chrome plating? The answer is chromium. Question 25. Which element is alloyed with aluminum to make soda cans? The answer is manganese. Question 26. Which metal helps carry oxygen in our blood? The answer is iron. Question 27. Which element gives a blue color to glass? The answer is cobalt. Question 28. Which element alloyed with copper is used in making modern coin? The answer is nickel. Question 29. Which reddish metal is used in electrical wires and plumbing pipes? The answer is copper. Question 30. Which element helps fight infections, heal wounds, support growth, and improve the loss of taste and smell? The answer is zinc. Question 31. Which metal melts in your hand? The answer is gallium. Question 32. Which element is used in fiber optics and lenses for infrared cameras? The answer is germanium. Question 33. Which harmful element was used in old pesticides and wood protection? The answer is arsenic. Question 34. Which element gives decorative glass a pink or red color? The answer is selenium. Question 35. Which non-metal reddish-brown liquid is used to make materials fire-resistant? The answer is bromine. Question 36. Which noble gas white lights is used in super bright airport runway during foggy weather? The answer is krypton. Question 37. Which metal is used in atomic clocks for accurate timekeeping? The answer is rubidium. Question 38. Which element is used in fireworks to produce bright red color? The answer is strontium. Question 39. Which metal is used in radiotherapy to treat liver cancer tumors? The answer is yttrium. Question 40. Which element is found in mineral zircon and used in making heat-resistant ceramic? The answer is zirconium. Question 41. What element is alloyed with titanium to produce superconductors? The answer is niobium. Question 42. Which element is found in mineral molybdenite? The answer is molybdenum. Question 43. Which element was the first to be artificially created and identified in a laboratory in 1937? The answer is technetium. Question 44. Which element is used to harden palladium for jewelry? The answer is ruthenium. Question 45. Which metal is used in car catalytic converters to help reduce harmful emissions? The answer is rhodium. Question 46. Which metal helps in reducing vehicle emissions alongside platinum and rhodium? The answer is palladium. Question 47. Which metal is known for having the highest electrical conductivity of all elements on the periodic table? The answer is silver. Question 48. Which toxic metal was used in bright-colored paints and rechargeable batteries? The answer is cadmium. Question 49. Which soft silvery metal is used in touchscreens? The answer is indium. Question 50. Which silvery metal is used in soldering electronic components? The answer is tin. Question 51. Which toxic metalloid was used to treat parasitic infections? The answer is antimony. Question 52. Which brittle metalloid is used in cadmium telluride solar cells? The answer is tellurium. Question 53. Which element is used to treat goiter and other thyroid-related disorders? The answer is iodine. Question 54. Which noble gas is used as a general anesthetic in medical procedures? The answer is xenon. Question 55. Which alkali metal is commonly used in atomic clocks for accurate timekeeping? The answer is cesium. Question 56. Which element is used in fireworks to produce a bright green color? The answer is barium. Question 57. Which rare element is used in camera lenses and smartphone displays? The answer is lanthanum. Question 58. Which element is used in lighter flames to produce sparks? The answer is cerium. Question 59. Which rare element is used to give a green tint to protective goggles? The answer is praseodymium. Question 60. Which element produces a strong magnetic field in a small size, often used in headphones and earbuds? The answer is neodymium. Question 61. Which radioactive rare earth element is used in nuclear batteries due to its beta radiation? The answer is promethium. Question 62. Which rare element is used to treat bone pain caused by cancer that has spread to the bone? The answer is samarium. Question 63. Which element is used as a phosphor to produce bright red colors in TV screens? The answer is europium. Question 64. Which element is commonly used in MRI scans as a contrast agent to help doctors see clearer images inside the body? The answer is gadolinium. Question 65. Which element is used as a phosphor to create a bright green color in TV screens? The answer is terbium. Question 66. Which element is added to neodymium magnets inside headphones to help them keep performing at high temperatures? The answer is dysprosium. Question 67. Which element has the strongest magnetic properties of all elements on the periodic table? The answer is holmium. Question 68. Which element is added to glass fibers to improve internet signals? The answer is erbium. Question 69. Which element is used in portable X-ray machines? The answer is thulium. Question 70. Which element is co-doped with erbium in fiber optic amplifiers for long-distance communication? The answer is ytterbium. Question 71. Which rare earth element is used in PET scan detectors due to its gamma ray detecting crystals? The answer is lutetium. Question 72. Which element is used in chips as a high-K dielectric material to improve transistor performance? The answer is hafnium. Question 73. Which metal is used in capacitors for smartphones and laptops due to its high stability? The answer is tantalum. Question 74. Which hard metal is commonly used in cutting tools and drill bits? The answer is tungsten. Question 75. Which element has the highest boiling point, 5596 degrees Celsius, on the periodic table? The answer is rhenium. Question 76. Which metal was historically used in fountain pen nibs for its hardness? The answer is osmium. Question 77. Which element is used in spark plugs and high-performance electrical contact? The answer is iridium. Question 78. Which precious metal is heavier and more durable than gold? The answer is platinum. Question 79. Which metal is most commonly used in jewelry? The answer is gold. Question 80. Which metal is liquid at room temperature? The answer is mercury. Question 81. Which toxic element was historically used in rat poison? The answer is thallium. Question 82. Which element is effective for shielding against X-rays and gamma radiation? The answer is lead. Question 83. Which element is used as an alternative to lead in medical and cosmetic products? The answer is bismuth. Question 84. Which radioactive element emits alpha particles and is very hazardous to humans? The answer is polonium. Question 85. Which radioactive element is used in targeted alpha therapy for precise cancer treatment? The answer is astatine. Question 86. Which gas forms by natural breakdown of uranium in soil and rocks? The answer is radon. Question 87. Which highly radioactive alkali metal was named after France? The answer is francium. Question 88. Which toxic metal was historically used in luminous paints for watch dials and clocks? The answer is radium. Question 89. Which radioactive element glows pale blue in the dark? The answer is actinium. Question 90. Which radioactive element is used in gas lamp mantles to produce a bright white when heated? The answer is thorium. Question 91. Which element is an intermediate in the decay chain uranium-235, often used in nuclear research? The answer is protactinium. Question 92. Which heavy metal is used in nuclear bombs and to find the age of rocks? The answer is uranium. Question 93. Which element is formed by beta decay after uranium-238 captures a neutron and becomes uranium-239? The answer is neptunium. Question 94. Which element is used in radioisotope thermoelectric generators RTGs to power spacecraft? The answer is plutonium. Question 95. Which radioactive element is commonly used in smoke detectors? The answer is americium. Question 96. Which radioactive synthetic element glows purple in the dark? The answer is curium. Question 97. Which element was made by bombarding americium with alpha particles? The answer is berkelium. Question 98. Which element is used as a strong neutron source for detecting gold and silver ores? The answer is californium. Question 99. Which element was the first to be discovered in the debris of Ivy Mike hydrogen bomb test? The answer is einsteinium. Question 100. Which element was discovered alongside einsteinium in the fallout of Ivy Mike hydrogen bomb test? The answer is fermium. Question 101. Which element was first made by bombarding einsteinium with alpha particles? The answer is mendelevium. Question 102. Which synthetic element is created by bombarding curium with carbon nuclei in a particle accelerator? The answer is nobelium. Question 103. Which synthetic element is created by bombarding californium atoms with boron nuclei? The answer is lawrencium. Question 104. Which synthetic element is produced by bombarding californium with carbon? The answer is rutherfordium. Question 105. Which element is produced by bombarding californium or americium with nitrogen or neon? The answer is dubnium. Question 106. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding californium or lead with oxygen or chromium? The answer is seaborgium. Question 107. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding bismuth or lead with chromium or vanadium? The answer is boron. Question 108. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding lead with iron? The answer is hassium. Question 109. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding bismuth with iron or nickel? The answer is meitnerium. Question 110. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding lead with nickel atoms? The answer is darmstadtium. Question 111. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding bismuth with nickel atoms? The answer is roentgenium. Question 112. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding lead with zinc atoms? The answer is copernicium. Question 113. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding bismuth with zinc atoms? The answer is nihonium. Question 114. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding plutonium with calcium atoms? The answer is flerovium. Question 115. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding americium with calcium atoms? The answer is moscovium. Question 116. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding curium with calcium atoms? The answer is livermorium. Question 117. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding berkelium with calcium atoms? The answer is tennessine. Question 118. Which synthetic element is made by bombarding californium with calcium atoms? The answer is oganesson.
You made it to the end! Drop your rank in the comments, like if you want more quizzes.